All right, bienvenue and willkommen back to Street Signs, right? We know that Europe is a mess, but enough with the what's gone wrong stuff. You know that. Let us walk you through some of the possible solutions that have been talked about because it is a very fluid and often confusing situation. Okay, the first possible answer to their problems, stay the course. A combination of benefits and bailouts and austerity. Problem here is that many people believe the bailouts are not big enough and that countries like Greece facing austerity won't deal with it well anyway, and it will slow economies that are already slowing down, essentially making the debt spiral worse. All right, first possibility, status quo. Number two, the suggestion of maybe a larger bailout, maybe the equivalent of something like the Euro TARP plan that we had here for our banks, right? The question with that would be, where does the money come from, right? Many of these countries, the IMF, which is a big part of you, taxpayer in America, getting a little burned out of spending all that coin, right? So that's number two. Number three, maybe a Euro bond. Been a lot of discussion about this. Germany was very anti-Euro bond at first. Some stories out in the last couple of days that maybe they're warming up to the idea of a common bond. Remember, the Eurozone is a common currency, the euro, right? But it does not have a common debt market. All the debt there is issued by each individual country, and many people think that is simply unsustainable. Problem, though, with a euro bond is that it will take a huge amount of time to build, to issue, to get out there. Time, though, like money, something Europe doesn't have a whole lot of. The last solution, had to put it last, really sort of seen as the final answer, right? Default. Just go to the banks, go to the bondholders, say, I'm sorry, you're getting 75 cents, you're getting 40 cents, you're getting 25 cents on the dollar. You wake up the next day, you go to work, economies are going to get hurt, but listen, that's the last option. And guys, these are serious, but I just want to throw this out because it's kind of going around today. Apple's market cap is now basically the same as all the Eurozone banks combined. So maybe Apple just buys the banks and everything's fine.
I think that's the best solution of all, Sully. I just want to also mention that the Dow is now around the lows of the day. It's down by triple digits at this stage, or it was down by triple digits. It's now by 96 points. Will any of these fixes work is the question. Let's bring in Peter Zion, Vice President of Analysis at Stratfor, a global intelligence company. We've just played Pick a Solution with Sully there on the wall. Which one would you pick?
If it were up to me, I think I just skipped right to default.
Really? Why?
Well, we're at the point now that something to keep in mind about the European banks, they're basically tools of the state. They're not independent like American banks. And so in order to head off defaults and bailouts to this point, all of the governments have been leaning on their banks to invest in Irish and Portuguese and Greek debt. So they're full to their gills with this debt now, which means their entire financial sector is actually less solvent than their governments. So all of this has to shake out sooner or later, and if it was up to me, I'd say just get it over with.
All right, we've been here before, maybe not of this magnitude, Peter, right? We had Russia in '98, Indonesia, we've had Argentina multiple times. We have had many sovereign defaults the last 20 years, and actually their economies and their stock markets generally have recovered quite nicely after default, thank you very much. But yet those countries had their own currencies. They could devalue the currencies, right, and they can sort of deflate in a way their way out of this mess. How does this euro issue, the currency, complicate that?
Two major problems. One is just the sheer scale. I mean, a Greek default would be far worse than the Pakistani and the Russian default put together. Just the volumes of debt here are so ridiculous. You need $2 trillion a year just to keep everything turned over. That's one. Number two, none of these states have control of their full monetary tools. None of these states have control of their full monetary toolkit. Normally what you would do is you would decide to do a default, you would start to print currency, you would monetize your debt. You'd do that in small amounts or large amounts based on how clever you think you can, how many things you think you can get away with. The Swedes even have managed to do this in the past very successfully. The Italians basically wrote the book on it. None of them have that option anymore because the ECB is headquartered in Germany. It's a treaty-run institution that has at least nominal independence, and it simply won't allow the states to do that. They would have to leave the Eurozone first and then default.
So what would a default mean for the euro? I know it sounds like a simple question, but what would it do? And I think what's really interesting here is I know that there are various other stress indicators, but at the same time, if you just look at the euro solely, it's holding up incredibly well and does not seem to be pricing in a default at all.
That's because of the Germans.
Yeah.
If the currency was allowed to trade on its own druthers and it was based off the Greek economy, it would probably be worth about 30 cents. If it was allowed to trade entirely off of the German economy, it would probably be worth about 280. You put all of those people into the same economy, and all of a sudden you've got this market where the Southern Europeans can never recover because the currency is too strong, but the Germans are kicking butt and taking names with their exports because their currency is too weak.
You know, and that's such a great point. You know, and listen, Peter, I mean, in America, we've got states that are prospering, and we have states that are suffering and have higher unemployment. But the difference between the best and worst economic U.S. state, I was blown away having been to Greece, been to Germany recently. They're so markedly different from an economic perspective, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be insulting to Greece or anything
Chalk
like that.
and cheese.
I mean, yeah, it is. Do you think they can stick together ultimately?
Oh, absolutely not. The income differential in the United States is less than 2 to 1 from the richest to the poorest. In the Eurozone, it's 3 to 1, and in the EU as a whole, it's 5 to 1.
If you say absolutely not, I mean, when is this all going to come home to roost? What sort of time frame are we looking at?
Well, keep in mind that Germany is a first world economy that has the potential, should it choose to throw €1 trillion a year at a problem. They have the ability to drag this out for quite some time, because if the bailout fund gets ratified in its current form, it will have legal authority to go ahead and preemptively do bailouts even without going back to the Council of Ministers. That's a very important tool. That's basically creating, if you will, a TARP-like structure that has a certain amount of political autonomy.
Is that a TARP-like structure over the whole Eurozone, or in your worst-case scenario, is that a structure that does bust up the euro? We all go back to a bunch of different countries. Goodbye, Eurobond. Where does this go?
It's a temporary funding facility, and it can, in its current size, handle Spain. You beef it up by a factor of 5, it can handle in Italy. It can also handle banks, which is a nice touch, something that they did learn from TARP. However, it can only hold the position. It can't actually solve it. For that, you need a full transfer union, or specifically I would call it a fiscal union. You need a single authority in Europe that has the ability to tax everybody and spend the money where it needs to. So New York can support West Virginia,
right.
so that food sources in the Midwest can supply Arizona. You've got to basically blur, if not eliminate, the national borders. But that requires 16 countries in Europe giving up their national prerogatives to Berlin. That's not going to happen.
We got to leave it there, but it's a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Peter.
My pleasure.